Good morning. Welcome again to Life Point Crossing Church. Yes, there is some energy this morning. I like that. We have some clapping. This is wonderful. All right. I'm never really against it. Never. Shouldn't say never. I can think of some things, and now I'm in a terrible train, and look what you have done to me. See how I just blamed you for what I was saying? We'll get to that in a little bit, but I'm so glad that you're here. I'm also glad that Kansas City has a new airport terminal. I have various family members that come in on some regular-ish basis, and so I'm there with some regularity. And one thing I don't understand is why they have everybody being picked up at the exact same spot, though. It can be kind of crowded. It can really be a bit of a hassle. And the reason for that is because almost every airplane arrives at its intended destination. Now, I don't know if any of you have a fear of flying. I don't. I've flown lots of times. I can certainly understand it. If you could really play with your mind, if you think about the fact that you're suspended 25,000 feet above the ground and absolutely nothing that you can do about anything. I understand how that could get to somebody, but I'm a data guy. I look at the data, and the data tells me that it is almost certain that that airplane is going to deliver you or your loved ones safely to their intended destination. Now, some of you may have noticed that I said almost every and almost certain, and those are not identical with every and certain, and that, of course, is because every once in a very, very great while, things go horribly, horribly wrong, and a plane goes down. It happens, and when this happens, of course, this is a huge deal. This is a huge tragedy, and along with, and on some level kind of piggybacked with, the terrible loss of life, because a lot of times nobody survives, right? And if nobody survives, then how do you find out what happened? And how do you prevent what happened from happening again if you don't find out what happened? Well, this is a real problem, and we should be doing everything we can to prevent airplanes from going down. And so to that end, in the 80s or 90s, most of the public became aware of what are called flight data recorders, more commonly known as black box, although they're apparently very rarely black at this point. But it takes notes of what's going on with the airplane and the conditions and all the instrument things that the pilots are doing. And it is indestructible. It is titanium covered. And so this means that in the unfortunate event that a plane does go down and there's nobody who's going to be around to tell them what happened, then really, really smart people can go find the black box, plug it in, look at the data, and now they can see what happened, what was the real problem, so that they can hopefully prevent that problem from happening again in the future. And so this is going to be, of course, a message series about airline crashes. No, of course not. I didn't actually think anyone was going to laugh at that. I should take that out. But you got the low standard this morning. Everyone's feeling good from the game yesterday. I'm very excited about that. No kidding. Yesterday I said, Laura, all right, it's going to be a happy day at church. So if that makes me a Chiefs fan, whatever that makes me. But this is going to be the parallel here, I think, is that God has given really each one of us something very similar, something that kind of takes notes on what's going on inside and has the ability to give us tremendous inside data on what we have going on inside. And of course, before the 80s or 90s, nobody would have called it a black box. So this is what, for most of history, and certainly in the Bible, is generally referred to as the heart. And by heart, sometimes you mean a lot of different things, but obviously doesn't mean the cardiovascular muscle that pumps blood, doesn't mean emotions or feelings really so much, but just that kind of indescribable, what doesn't have to be described, inner part that makes up who we are. And here's the deal, is the way that Jesus and the Bible talk about the heart, like every time we're going to see something and we'll just say like, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, Jesus is right. The Bible's right. That's exactly true. However, despite that, what we're going to deal with in this series is very, really, quite rare, I feel like, even in the church, because the way we tend to deal with a whole lot of things is less about the heart and more about trying to do anything and everything we can, and I do this as well, right, to have you modify your behaviors. Now, there's good reasons for that. Behaviors are important, and behaviors have outcomes and consequences, and we want you to have the best possible outcomes, and so we want you to have the best behaviors. If the behavior is cheating on your spouse, then the likely outcome is going to be a shattered marriage relationship and a life of ruin and regret, at least for a significant period of time. Well, that's terrible. So we say, no, you guys. Let's do like Jesus and the Bible tell us, right? And then we'll have much better outcomes. And it's true. If the behavior is getting into unnecessary debt, and then maybe you're stressed out and you can't pay your bills, or maybe even you can, but now you just can't have the life that you would want outside of that, then we say, oh, okay, you guys, don't do that. Let's modify your behavior, and then you'll have way better outcomes. And it's real and it's true, and we want to help you with all sorts of things like that, and we will, but as much as we can do that, there is very often a whole another level of things going on that we haven't even touched, because the behavior is often the expression of the problem, but it's very often not the real heart of the problem, not the real root of the problem. And so we can change our behavior, and that's good. That'll help us. But if we don't find the real heart of the problem, the real root of the problem, why is this a behavior that we're considering anyway? Why are you going to do something that maybe is going to have a really negative outcome? And let's be honest, most of the time we know that before we engage in whatever it is, right? Like, why are we doing that in the first place? And if we don't deal with the real heart, the real root of the issue, then almost every time what ends up happening is whatever the issue is, it's just going to pop up in some different part of life and create some different part of a problem, some different problem, because we haven't really dealt with the problem. We've only dealt with the behavior. So it's like asking, well, why did that airplane go down? What happened with flight? Whatever number. And they say, well, bad news. It crashed into the mountainside. No! Oh, that's the worst thing that can happen. We got to have our planes not crash into mountainsides. Let's teach our pilots to dodge mountains. And so you go through all this training and all this learning, but they never really ask, okay, well, like, really, though, what's going on? Because obviously no pilots are trying to crash their planes into mountainsides, and none of us are trying to crash our lives. But every one of us, in big ways or little ways, it happens, and we end up there in flames and in pain and in regret on the side of the mountain just in time for your good friend or maybe even Pastor Ross to come by and say, why'd you fly into the mountainside? That was a terrible decision. Why would that ever happen? Because we haven't dealt with the black box. You haven't checked what's going on in your heart. And when we do, we will be able to monitor, to learn, and to then work with God to really deal with issues from a heart level that is much, much deeper and more beneficial than just simple behavior modification. And none other than Jesus is going to show us how this works. Here is, just to start, a portion of what we call the Sermon on the Mount, and this will be familiar to a lot of us and is, in fact, a lot of times, a lot of guys' most hated verses, but there might be a little bit more here than is immediately obvious. Here's what he says. He says, you've heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. And that's a good commandment. I didn't double check. I think it's number 6. Of course, it's from the Old Testament. That's from the 10 Commandments. And it's a good commandment. You should not commit adultery. Along with being obvious, blatant sin against the holy God who created us, it will hurt you, it will hurt the people you love, it can ruin your life. But if all you do is not commit adultery, that's just behavior modification. And so here's what Jesus says. He says, but I say anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her where? In his heart. And so I think this is Jesus kind of raising the bar. I think this is Jesus kind of helping us see and understand that we are never going to, in our behavior, be good enough for a holy God. But I think this is also Jesus pointing us to something deeper, that what happens in your heart is at least as important, every bit as important as what behavior does, or in a case like this, even does not come out in actual behavior. Right here, there is no actual physical adultery, but he says, you know what? It's really just the same, because the problem, the real issue, is in the heart. There's another piece that's a little bit older, written by, we would say, the wisest man who ever lived, and we're not going to put the whole thing, but the little bit larger context is, like a lot of Proverbs, it's in sort of framed as a father passing on wisdom to their child. And it says a whole lot of things. It says to follow the way of wisdom, that's going to be a great decision. It says never follow wickedness, that leads to bad places. Follow righteousness, that ends much better. And then he comes to this. And so this is in the middle of all that. And look how just triple emphasized this is. He says, my child, pay attention to what I say. He's been talking even before this. But listen carefully to my words. Don't lose sight of them. Let them penetrate deep into into your heart. And this is interesting, for they bring life to those who find them and healing to their whole body, which seems like maybe another indication that what happens in your heart affects your whole self, including your physical self. But then here's what he has to say is guard your heart above all else. And here's why. Of course, it's because it determines the course of your life. Isn't that amazing? Jesus says that what goes on in your heart is every bit as important as your actual behavior. And here's the wisest man who ever lived saying to guard your heart because it determines the course of your life. Yet somehow, and I say this as a pastor, but most of us have probably never really thought a lot about or been taught to guard our hearts. You've been taught a lot about behavior modification, right? But you find it very, very difficult. And for whatever reason that maybe you can't even figure out, you keep trying and you keep crashing, and you keep trying and you keep trashing, and you're going to do it again. And this time you are absolutely determined you're going to keep the bird in the air. But it goes down again, and you don't know why this is. It's because we haven't checked and dealt with what's going on in our black box. And so behavior modification just hasn't worked for you, but Jesus is going to help us crack this thing open over the course of this series so that we can see and find and cooperate with God in dealing with some of the things that are going on in our hearts that will determine then the course of our lives. And of course, we'll be talking about some more specific things as the series goes along, but kind of the last major piece of this for today is again from Jesus, and this comes around to a very, very clear point, but it starts out, he's a little bit circuitous, and he says this in Luke 6, a good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit, and that makes sense. If it's producing good fruit, it can't be too bad of a tree. If it's producing bad fruit, it can't be too good of a tree. So, all right, we get that. And then he says, and a tree is identified by its fruit. Figs never grow on thorn bushes, or they would call them fig bushes, right? Nor grapes on bramble bushes. And if you know what brambles are, then you're ahead of me. But if I saw something and I said, what's that? And you said, it's a bramble. And I said, where did it come from? And you said, a bramble bush. That would make sense. I would understand that. And so we're tracking with him, and this is all fine and good as long as we stay on elementary level agriculture, but he starts to bring it around, not quite to you, but to people, at least, and he says this is the same thing. A good person produces good things from, where does this all come from? Well, the treasury of a good comes from the heart. And it's the same whether it's good or bad, right? An evil person produces evil things from the treasury of why it's evil, well, because of the evil heart. And so, like, all right, we're still with him. He's still making sense. We got it. But then he brings the hammer all the way down, and he says, and what you say flows from what is in your heart. And so Jesus says that if you want to know what's going on in your heart, what's happening in your black box, here's a great way to tell, is you just pay attention to the words that come out of your mouth. And this is very, very important, but it can also be very difficult because if you're a lot like me, there might be times when you don't really like some of the things that come out of your mouth. And don't we have a habit of then just kind of discounting or pretending like it really has nothing to do with me, whatever happened, whatever was said? Like I don't know, I don't even know where that came from. Well, Jesus does. It says it came from your heart. It's not really a mystery. I get this all the time. As a pastor, I'll be talking to someone and they'll let a cuss word slip, and they'll be like, "Oh, I don't know where that came from. I don't usually talk like that." I'm like, "Yeah, you do. I don't say that, but we all know." Even worse, think about maybe like the last time you lost your temper and you yelled at your spouse or your kid or the unhelpful customer service rep, or I don't know, you guys, Chiefs fans probably weren't yelling at the game yesterday because you did have a tendency to have those things go well for you, but whatever it was, I don't know, if you're here and you're a Texans fan, then God bless you, we love you too. But don't we have an incredible way? Every one of us is very, very talented at blaming the other person or the situation or the circumstance for what came out of our own mouth, right? Like but nobody, you know this, nobody can put anything in you and nobody can pull anything out of you unless it's in you to start with. So we all want to blame the stressed out spouse or the kid that's pushing their boundaries or the unhelpful customer service representative and pretend that has really nothing to do with what's going on inside of us. We're like, "Oh, that wasn't even me. That was so out of character. I don't even know where that came from." Here's the answer. It came from your heart. So you're blaming everything else and anything else, but all they did was they just gave you an opportunity to come face to face with some of the ugliness and some of the junk that you have floating around in your black box. And listen, I know some of you, particularly in a church with a lot of introverts, are thinking very happily and very smugly about how well you do at very consciously controlling the words and selecting the words that do and don't come out of your mouth. Don't think for a second this doesn't apply to you, because you know just a moment ago Jesus was saying that it's what happens in your heart that's every bit as important as your actual behavior. And so if you happen to have a very good verbal filter, that will help you. Things will go better for you. And I'm not saying that if you think it, then you should just say it because you're thinking it anyway, and so it's just being honest. No, if something shouldn't be said, then don't say it. That's going to really help you in your life. But congratulations on having a good verbal filter. But whatever that is that you kept from coming out of your mouth, but that you thought or maybe wanted to say, that's still coming from that exact same heart of yours. And if we don't examine what's going on in our heart, we will never be able to deal with the real heart issues and move forward and become more of the person who God created you to be. And let me tell you guys, I have a fairly effective verbal filter. I sometimes get in trouble for saying things, but it's usually a joke that landed wrong or got misinterpreted or misunderstood, or maybe even just was a genuine error in judgment. But it's not coming from a bad place, right? It's usually coming from a good place. That's what gets me in trouble, but it's not because my heart's so pure. It's just because I have to have a reasonably effective verbal filter. But here's an example of the kind of thing that we're talking about, and I just happened to come across this even this week, and just reading, is a story that the author was telling about a time that he was with three friends. The four of them were together, and they were good friends. They loved each other. It was safe, like nobody was getting their feelings hurt, but the three of them were kind of making fun of the fourth one a little bit, and then the fourth one said, "Hey, you guys, just so you know, I don't like me either." A little moment of truth and vulnerability among friends. A little bit of black box data from her heart. And then, although he didn't say it, he caught it in his verbal filter, but he said immediately what he thought was, "Oh, really? So I'm not the only one here that sometimes doesn't like myself." And as tragic as that might sound, and maybe really even is, he said that this really helped him when he thought about this and when he reflected on this, right? When he started really dealing with and paying attention to some of the data that's coming from his box. Because it was helpful for him to realize that not only did he like this friend of his, like he admired this person, he wished he would be more like her. And so he said that he started to feel a little bit better about himself when he recognized that even the people who he would look up to and admire would share a great deal of the same kind of brokenness than he had. And so he wrote that ever since hearing that and really thinking about that, he became a little bit more comfortable with being in sometimes uncomfortable skin. He said he started to feel a little bit less awkward about sometimes feeling a little bit awkward, and you know that his behavior was going to get so much better. And this isn't even necessarily like some dark or sinful thing or whatever, right? But how is his behavior going to be better if he begins to feel more comfortable and feel less awkward, or if he just tries to modify his behavior and say, okay, act more comfortable, like act less awkward? Because now his behavior was still going to change, but his behavior was going to change because he was being changed and changing, not just because he tried to change his behavior. This is a little bit of the power of the black box, and as we go along through this series, we'll deal with some very specific things that are real in probably all of our lives, and we're going to learn to guard our hearts because they determine the course of our lives. And I really think that this can be some of the most revealing, and if you let it, the most helpful material that I feel like I ever really deal with or come across. It will be worth your time and effort to come back, bring your friends. But here's just for this week, you guys, here's what will benefit you for this week, is just do this. Just start to pay attention. Just take notes on the kinds of things that you hear coming out of your mouth, or if you have a good filter, even some of the things that don't come out of your mouth, but that you think or maybe wish you could say, and especially some of the ugly stuff. Listen, as far as this goes, right? Like, don't judge yourself, don't get down on yourself, don't start to feel that you're terrible, but just pay attention to this priceless data that tells you what's going on in your heart, and you and God are going to be able to work and have not just behavior change, but real heart change and real progress in being who God created you to be. All right? Let's pray. Father, thank you so much that you not only give us the mechanisms to understand, but that you point us to the mechanisms to understand, that we're not left to wonder or worry or guess, but that the only thing standing between us and our understanding of ourselves and what we need to do to cooperate with your Spirit is ourselves. And if you're here and maybe you've never taken the first step to connect with God and have His Spirit enter into your life, it's very simple that every one of us has done things that were wrong. We knew they were wrong. That's sin. That destroys a relationship with a perfectly holy, righteous, just God who, in order to be a just judge, has to see that wrongdoing has justice satisfied. But what can a created human being possibly do to satisfy justice before the God who created us? Nothing, but that's why Jesus. His death on the cross, that was Him taking our place, satisfying justice for our sinfulness so that we could be forgiven and adopted as children of God in His family. If that's you, just right where you sit, you can pray out loud or just speak silently to God and He'll hear you say, God, I believe that Jesus Christ came and died and resurrected so I could be forgiven and be adopted as a child in your family. Please come into my life. Forgive me and adopt me. Begin to make me into the person you created me to be. And give me the life that you have for me. And if you just prayed a prayer like that for the first time, it's not the words of the prayer that saves you, it's that you put your faith in Jesus and God's grace comes to you through that, and you are a new spiritual creation. Will you please let somebody know you're not created to live this life by yourself? You can go out to the point, that's just the corner in the lobby, and let the person there know the decision you've made, or if you're online, send us a message. Either way, we'll be able to get back to you and follow up with some great next steps in your new life. For the rest of us, those of us, we've been following Jesus, but we all have some junk going on in our hearts. That's not just you, that's me and everybody else here or not here as far as that goes. Will you just commit to start to take this seriously, to look past the superficial, to really deal with and own some of the information about yourself and what's going on in your heart that you'll hear through your words and your thoughts, to really begin to reflect and work with God in changing who you are from the heart level, so that not just your behavior improves, but so that who you are becomes more Christ-like. Father, we thank you so much for the time and the ability to come together and look into these things and to together commit to these things by your Spirit. I ask that you would give each one of us here the strength and the courage and the follow through to take this long, hard look at ourselves for your glory in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.